Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises talking basketball, football combos. It's not just a football show. Well, it mostly is a football show, but it's March Madness. You can't be blind to March Madness, even though they might be trying to mess up March Madness by making it a 256 team field at some point. Right now, still a 68 team field. The men's and women's brackets announced on Sunday night. What we're doing on this show is I have determined my top 10 Northern combos. This is football, men's basketball, women's basketball. We cover our 26 Northern football schools on this show, but we want to acknowledge getting it done in the big time sports. So we are not getting into other Northern. We're not doing UConn here. We just don't do UConn as part of a football thing. So we know how good UConn is in men's and women's basketball, but they're not one of our teams. No offense to them. And we're not doing, Villanova or whatever. I don't know. We're not doing the football, the Northern basketball. We're talking about our Northern 26 football schools. And then how good are they also at basketball? So this is not an easy thing to do. I think I double checked on this. And in the history of, the world, I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 schools that have won all time, both a football national championship and a men's basketball national championship. This is what we're talking about, right? Those schools: Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, Maryland, Stanford, Cal, UCLA, Arkansas, Florida, Syracuse. Florida did it the same year. How crazy was that? So we're talking all time, just those 10 schools have done that. 5 of them are our Northern schools. So congratulations to Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, Maryland, and Syracuse for accomplishing that. That in your history, you have a men's basketball title and a football title. Now, throw in a women's basketball title, and I think this is right. There are only 2 schools that have won all 3 titles in the history of their programs. One is Stanford, and one is Maryland. So Maryland, look at Maryland. They're kind of on the border, they're in the Big Ten. So of course we take them. So congratulations to Maryland on that. So it's one of these things where I think we realize most schools lean football or basketball. It's hard to be good at both, but we are acknowledging right now, who are the best schools at being good at all of it. Okay. And so again, I checked this. I think this is right. There are 21, because sometimes you get into the basketball teams that play Division I AA, the FCS football playoff stuff. And that's great. We're not going to get caught up in that. So overall, there are 21 schools. Okay. There's a lot of math here. We'll get out of the math quick. 21 schools that made a bowl game this year and also made the men's tournament. Okay. But there are only 4 of those teams in the North. Okay. That made the men's basketball tournament and a bowl game: Iowa State, Northwestern, Oregon, and Wisconsin. So how awesome is that? And only 2 of those teams won a bowl game and also made the men's tournament. And that's Oregon and Northwestern. So that's way up there, right? So that really matters. There are 10 teams that made bowl games. Okay. 10 overall. So there are 21 that made bowl games and made the men's tournament. There are 10 programs that made bowl games and made the men's and women's tournament. Only one of those in the North, but I'll save you revealing that. Maybe you already know it. So, right. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about success across the board. And so I took some recent history into account, but it's more about right now, this very second. And so with our schools, our 26 schools, I will say there are only 2 that did not make a bowl game, no bowl game, and no men's tournament, NCAA tournament, and no women's NCAA tournament. So they're 0 for 3. So they're not getting ranked. And those are Pitt and Cincinnati. And they were both pretty close. Pitt was on the bubble for the men. They had a great end of the season, rough start, great end of the year. I think maybe they won 14 of their last 16, something like that. We're on the bubble, thought they were going to get in, turned down the NIT bid. So a little bit of a rough year for Pitt, right? In those 3 sports. And Cincinnati is a 2 seed in the NIT. So Cincinnati and Pitt were both kind of like in the mix, both winning men's basketball seasons, but did not make an NCAA tournament. These are the teams 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of our programs were 1 for 3. Men's tournament, women's tournament, or bowl. Those schools, Rutgers, Penn State, BYU, Minnesota, Washington, Boston College, Illinois, Purdue, which is a 1 seed in the men's tournament, and Indiana. Okay. So you're not in our top 10 because you're only 1 for 3. I didn't make it like say it was absolutely necessary to be 2 for 3 to make it, but that just also kind of made sense. Okay. So now of the rest of the schools that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? Because we had 2 that were 0, 9 that were 1. We have 15 that either went 2 for 3 or 3 for 3. We only have 1 that went 3 for 3. We have 14 that went 2 for 3. I'm going to pick a top 10 out of them. I think it's good little, learn a little bit as we get into the bracket about how these programs are doing. Because again, you're watching this probably because you're the fan of a Northern team. And this is going to give you a little bit of like what athletic departments are getting it done at a high level. 13 of our 26 football schools made the women's tournament. 10 of our 26 football schools made the men's tournament. So again, like that's half or less than half. So it is not easy to do when we're talking about you as a football program. We talk about you on the show because we care about football, and we have determined that you are a power conference Northern school that we're interested in, right? That's the threshold. You're in the North by our definition, and you're a power conference school in football. So to be that, and then to also compete at a high level of basketball, right? About a 50-50 proposition. Okay, let's do our top 10. I'll give you a couple that didn't make it. Wisconsin did not make it for me. Now, listen, Wisconsin, there was a time. Again, you guys know I started off doing this covering Ohio State. Man, there was a time when Bo Ryan was the men's basketball coach at Wisconsin and Brett Bielema was the football coach, and they were just like an unbelievably high-level athletic department and just a burr in the saddle for everybody. Bo Ryan was just an absolute, like, no nonsense, take no prisoners kind of coach. Love what Bo Ryan brought to the Big Ten. And then Brett Bielema, right? Like, just like did not care back then. But just so Wisconsin, they're there now again, right? They made the men's tournament. Obviously, Greg Gard, they're a 5 seed in the men's tournament. Didn't have a great women's basketball season, which did sort of hold them back a little bit here. 13-16 for the women's program this year. But then they did make a bowl last year with Luke Fickell, right? So we think they're on the rise in football, and they're there in basketball, but they didn't quite make it. Syracuse also didn't quite make it. Syracuse did make a bowl, but they fired their football coach while making a bowl. So like that's kind of one of those things. That's not great. And they're kind of in this transition away from Jim Boeheim. Adrian Autry, first-year head coach for the men's team at Syracuse, went 20-12, did not make the tournament. And so, Jim Boeheim, 47 years, 34 NCAA tournaments, 5 Final Fours, 20 Sweet 16s, a national title. They're in this new era of men's basketball for Syracuse, which has been obviously the dominant athletic team for Syracuse for a long time. And then Syracuse, from a win standpoint, 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, 23-7. So they made a bowl. Their women made it. Their men were close, 20-win season, but like not quite, as they move out of the Boeheim era and they enter in football, the Fran Brown era, which we are excited about. We've talked a lot about on this show. Didn't quite make it. Okay. So, I thought about you guys. I took everybody into consideration. Couple other of the other two team, programs that had 2 teams reach our threshold and are in our top 10. Michigan State football program down, but we like the Jonathan Smith hire. So both their men's and women's basketball teams are 9 seeds in the NCAA tournament. And obviously they both have a chance to do something. So Michigan State just missed it though. And again, long-term, when Mark D'Antonio was doing his thing at Michigan State for football, and we know what Tom Izzo is a Hall of Famer, Michigan State has been a super high level winning both ways program for a very long time. This is a little bit more of like right now in the football program, dragged them down just a little bit to not quite make it. And then West Virginia was also very close. Again, this is another transition thing. West Virginia we are all about West Virginia this coming football season. Again, as you know, we've talked about them a lot. We think they're an absolute playoff contender. They're a Big 12 title contender. 9-4 last year under Neil Brown. Just gave him a 1-year extension. Bob Huggins out, interim coach in, did not go well for the men this year. 9-23, they're in a coaching search. So that pulled them down. The women, 24-7, 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. So football program in good shape. Men's basketball program has been a winner, but is in a transition, much like Syracuse. Except Syracuse has their coach. And the women's program, good. So again, that's really good. Didn't quite make it. Just like didn't. So maybe you're mad. I understand it. But let's start with the teams that did make it. Our top 10 best women's basketball, men's basketball, football combos in the North, and number 10 is Colorado. This is a little bit hype. I get it, right? But here's what we're doing with Colorado. Colorado, their women's basketball team is a 5 seed, 22-9. Their men's basketball team is in a play-in game as a 10 seed, 24-10. So they get both in, and they were the kings of September in college football. So I'm trying to think, like, if you're Colorado right now, you're a Colorado sports fan, because I do think the threshold we're trying to set here is like it's postseason. Like, do you get to the end of the year and it's like, yeah, we're still going? Bowl game, NCAA tournament. So Colorado wasn't that in football, but their September was so awesome that it carried the day a little bit. So they finished 4-8 in football. We're acknowledging that. And I get this is where Syracuse and Wisconsin and West Virginia are like, what are you doing? Why is Colorado in here? But the women's basketball program, they made the Sweet 16 last year for the first time in 20 years. They tied for 5th during the regular season in the Pac-12. They're a 5 seed again, like a pretty good year. Right. So I think like this is, like a good women's basketball team. And the men's basketball team, Tad Boyle, he's made 6 NCAA tournaments in 14 years. They're playing Boise State in a play-in game on Wednesday, 24-10. So, like, I get it. The football team hasn't been good. The football team, what is it? 16 of 18 losing seasons, I think, in football. So this might be a little more. Might be some Deion juice, like filtering over into basketball rankings here. But listen, I just thought the excitement that Deion Sanders brought to the football program in year one, early in the year, was something that I thought had like real value for Colorado fans, because this is a fan show. So I'm trying to think like the fan bases who were best served right now by their programs. I thought Colorado fans were served because they had an exciting year. And even though they only won 1 game after September, there was a lot of excitement and hope and juice in that program. And then 2 teams in the tournament, that was enough for me. So iffy, maybe a little iffy, right? Sorry, Wisconsin. Sorry, Syracuse. All right, 9 is Utah. 9 is Utah. The men's basketball team was... I have an actual flow chart. 19-14 for men's basketball. So, but they are like not in a great spot right now. So I remember Rick Majerus. Everybody loves Rick Majerus, right? Like the big jolly elf of March Madness for a while. 12 of 15 NCAA tournaments in the Rick Majerus era. But since then, they've only made 3 of 19 NCAA tournaments. They are a number 2 seed in the NIT against UC Irvine. So the men's basketball program like isn't exactly where it wants to be, but they were competitive. So that mattered to me. Again, like this is a competitive team that was sort of like in the mix, right? For stuff, 19-win season. So didn't make the NCAA tournament, but close. The women, 22-10 for the Utah women. They're a 5 seed. This is their 3rd straight NCAA tournament appearance under Lynn Roberts. They made the Sweet 16 last year. So Utah women's basketball is like in a good spot. They're a 5 seed. That's awesome. And then football's Kyle Whittingham. Like, what are we talking about? They have the 11th best Power 5 winning percentage over the past 21 years, 4th best in the North, behind Ohio State, Oregon, and Wisconsin. So the last 21 years, Utah's been as good as anybody, right? And so like that carries a day. I know they were 8-5 last year, which is for Utah, frankly, is a down year. Last 4 full seasons, taking out the COVID year, they're 39-16. So I thought the combination of how good they've been, how well that football program has served its fans, that the women's basketball program is in a really good spot right now off the Sweet 16 last year, and the men's basketball program is close. right? That they've been down, but they almost made the tournament this year. Maybe they're trending in the right way a little bit. So that's why I put Utah in. It gets a little more obvious towards the top. Nebraska is 8. This is like Nebraska is on the stinking rise here. Okay. Nebraska women's basketball under Amy Williams. They had kind of a rough spot several years ago. Connie Yori, who was their longtime successful coach, had some accusations of mistreatment of players and had to resign. So like they're kind of rebounding from that. This is their third 20-win season in 8 years for women's basketball at Nebraska. They had made 7 of 9 NCAA tournaments between 2007 and 2015. This is now their third tournament in the last 8 years. So, right, they've been in this. What I'm trying to say about women's basketball in Nebraska, they've been good. They kind of had a rough spot there, but they're kind of coming back. So, I thought like that, the women's program trending in the right direction is a 6 seed. Okay, now the men's basketball program, like they're freaking going crazy, man. This is their second NCAA tournament appearance in 26 years. They are an 8 seed, and like they were the 3 seed in the Big Ten tournament. Like this is an unbelievable year for men's basketball for Nebraska. So I thought like Fred Hoiberg in year 5, this is his first winning season, 23-10, like just totally trending up. So 22-11 for the women, 23-10 for the men, for a great, awesome season for Nebraska basketball. And then we like where the football program's headed. So they are 2 of 3. They didn't make a bowl in football. They were 5-7. They were close. And we like the possibility of what Matt Rule's going to do in year 2 there. So I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you're excited for March. The combination of how good your men's and women's teams are together right now in basketball. I don't know the last time you felt this good about the 2 programs combined. And football, you feel like, is maybe coming back. Now, here's the crazy thing. I think you guys know this. This is like unbelievable. So Trev Alberts, former Nebraska player, the AD at Nebraska, just left Nebraska to go become the athletic director at Texas A&M because they gave him an oil rig. I don't know. And Nebraska, in both the men's tournament and the women's tournament, their first round game is against Texas A&M. And as Zach Carpenter, who does a great job covering Nebraska sports for Rivals, pointed out, the people who are on the basketball committees are athletic directors. So this is not like, oh no, Texas A&M, both games? Oh my, what happened? We didn't know. Hey, Trev, here's your parting gift. Cornhusker A, Cornhusker B. Boom shakalaka. Unbelievable. Makes me want to be like a Nebraska sports writer right now. Both teams. An alum bails on his school to go to Texas A&M, which is just like, you're just going to have donors ringing your doorbell at 3:00 in the morning asking you why you made that decision. Trev Alberts is like, I'm good. I'm out. Going to Texas A&M. Both tournament games, Nebraska, Texas A&M. People sometimes think they think the media is like, petty or vindictive. And we are, but we're not the only ones, right? Other people are petty and vindictive too, not just sports writers. Okay. So that's a big, like they're all kind of right around each other, right? 10 Colorado, 9 Utah, 8 Nebraska. Number 7 on the list is Northwestern. And this is like the golden age of Northwestern sports. This is unbelievable what is happening at Northwestern right now, because obviously men's basketball, this is the greatest era in men's basketball history for Northwestern, because Northwestern has made the NCAA tournament, the men's basketball team, 2 consecutive years. They had only made the tournament once ever before. So Chris Collins in his 11th year is the first men's basketball coach at Northwestern to ever make the NCAA tournament, made it in 2017 and now made it last year and then just made it this year. They are a 9 seed against Florida Atlantic, opposite UConn in Brooklyn. They were 12-8 in the Big Ten each of the last 2 years. Like, it's just like, it's hard to wrap your head around that Northwestern basketball is this good. Boo Buie is like the best player in the history of Northwestern men's basketball. He led them to the tournament the last 2 years. So that's a huge thing, right? 21-11, that's a huge thing. The women's basketball program is pulling them down a little bit, but they've been good before, like kind of recently. 9-21 each of the last 2 years for Northwestern women's basketball, but not really competitive. But the problem for them is maybe the greatest season in Northwestern women's basketball history was the COVID year. They were 26-4. They tied for the Big Ten regular season title at 16-2 for the first time in 30 years. Joe McEwen, the head coach, they were flying high. He's been to 2 tournaments in 16 years there. That would have been the third, though. And so they made the tournament in 15. They made the tournament in 21. Again, they had that awesome 20 season. So like kind of like a program on the rise, and then they've fallen off a cliff the last 2 years, 9-21, 9-21. So it's not like a hopeless women's basketball program. They're just in a ditch right now, but they've been good recently. So that helps push them. And then David Braun took over after the hazing scandal at Northwestern's football last year. That cost Pat Fitzgerald his job. David Braun, never been head coach before, comes in. They go 8-4. No, they go 7-4, 7-5. 7-5 in the regular season. They beat Utah in a bowl game, which is partly why I had Northwestern kind of all over the place here. But they beat Utah head-to-head in a bowl game, one of our Northern Bowl matchups. So that helped push Northwestern ahead of Utah here. Finished 8-5. They had been 4-20 in football the previous 2 years. They had a 1-win year and a 3-win year. So you can't like forget that. Like they've been awful recently in football, but they also had won the Big Ten West in football in 2018 and 2020. But then they were horrible in 21 and 22, and then they were good again in 23. So who knows what they're going to be like in football right now? But this has been a winning, like a good era. We know how terrible Northwestern football was for like a long, long time. This has been a good era of Northwestern football. Last year's a really good year for Northwestern, and it's the best year of men's basketball. And they're not that far removed from sort of like the best era of women's basketball. So I kind of like kept redoing this list and kept moving Northwestern up and up and up. And as we noted, 2 Northern programs win a bowl game, make the men's tournament. It's Northwestern and it's Oregon. And Oregon had to win the Pac-12 tournament to get in the NCAA tournament. Oregon was not going to make it. Like Northwestern just made it. So, you know, like Northwestern, it wasn't as good of a bowl game as some, you know, as Penn State was, or whatever. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Northwestern was in a solid bowl game in Vegas against Utah. But anyway, like fan service. You win a bowl game, you make the men's tournament. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's for Northwestern? Like, it's seriously, it's unbelievable how good Northwestern sports is right now. So I think Northwestern fans realize it, and they are basking in the glow. Number 6 is Ohio State. And this is a really weird spot for Ohio State because Ohio State has made a New Year's Six Bowl in football 10 out of 10 years in the 14 playoff era. Like nobody else in the North did that. I don't think anybody else in college football did that because Alabama the 1 year didn't make it. So like the football program, consistent winning, fan service at the highest level. Like again, one of our thresholds that we're going to get to at the end is the number of combined NCAA tournaments and New Year's Six Bowl appearances. Because New Year's Six Bowls, right, in that old system was 12 teams. So it was 6 bowls. So it's like the top 12 football teams. And then we're talking, it's not NCAA tournaments. The thing at the end is an interesting stat. You're not going to find this stat anywhere else. It'll be at the end. It's New Year's Six Bowls and Sweet 16. So it's sort of like not just like making the postseason, but like high level postseason that you're winning in the NCAA tournament, or you're making like one of the high profile bowls. Ohio State's 10 for 10 in those bowls. So the football program, like through the roof, right? Maybe, Ohio State standard in a lot of ways is national championships, which is also I push back against because I don't know that historically it's actually been that standard. It's been Ohio State standards really constantly be in the mix for national championships. It is not national championship or bust, but certainly Ohio State's going to have a chance to win the national championship in football this year. Women's basketball is awesome right now. Ohio State women, they won the regular season in the Big Ten. They got knocked out early, upset in the Big Ten tournament. That cost them a 1 seed. So they are the number 2 seed, the best seeds for the women in the North. Iowa's a 1 seed. Ohio State and Notre Dame are 2 seeds. So 25-5 this year in the 11th year under head coach Kevin McGuff. They made the Elite Eight last year. They made the Sweet 16 the year before. This is a women's basketball program that is trending up. They have a real shot. They're not in the same region as South Carolina, which is an absolute, obviously undefeated juggernaut as the A1 seed, and they're not in the same region as Iowa. I think they're in the same region. I think they're in the region with USC as their 1 seed. They have a shot to make the Final Four. Ohio State women won Final Four in history, 1993 with Katie Smith. So this has a chance to be like arguably the greatest season in Ohio State women's basketball history. So what's holding them back is the men's program because they fired their coach. So the men's program has not made a Sweet 16 since 2013. So that's primarily on Chris Holtmann, who got fired in his 7th season this year. He did make 6 tournament appearances, but they never won more than 1 game. 4-6 in the last 10 years in the NCAA tournament, is not great. They had been to 4 straight Sweet 16s before this gap. So they had been, right? I mean, they're there every March, they're competing, and then not great. And the last 6 years combined, they are under 500 in their combined Big Ten record. So they've been a losing conference program, and it cost Chris Holtmann his job. Jake Diebler did a great job as the interim coach. So good, he won the full-time job. They were 6-2 under Jake Diebler. They are a 2 seed in the NIT. So the basketball program, they're trending up just because people were tired of Chris Holtmann and wanted him gone. But it's a little bit of an interesting spot because the Jake Diebler hire for Ohio State is kind of similar to the Ryan Day hire. They're elevating an assistant. So Urban Meyer leaves, they elevate Ryan Day. Chris Holtmann's fired, they elevate Jake Diebler. But when they hired Ryan Day after the 2018 season to take over in 2019 for Urban Meyer, they wanted to retain the structure and the skeleton of that football program. It was like they're winning. They want to keep winning. So I think that part of the idea is you keep Ryan Day, you keep the infrastructure, you keep the strength coach, you keep the recruiting guru, you keep the operations people, you keep a lot of the same things. That's not where the basketball program is. The whole thing with the basketball program at Ohio State is that it hasn't been good enough. And so it's not the same reasoning. It's not that you want more of the same. So I think there's significantly more risk involved with the Jake Diebler hire. It's not the hire I would have made if I was Ohio State. I would have swung for the fences. There's some really interesting, one of the most interesting things in Northern sports right now is that the 2 programs that helped launch Kings of the North with a college football national championship game, Michigan and Washington, both fired their head basketball coaches. So I said, and then Ohio State, which was the second best team in the Big Ten, fired its basketball coach. So of the 4 best football programs in the North, only 1 didn't fire its basketball coach. That's Oregon. So it's a weird time to try to, Washington's not here. Washington's coming off a national championship game in football. They're not in our top 10 because their basketball programs aren't up to snuff right now, but they've been in the past. So the Washington job's a good job. The Michigan job's a good job. Louisville has an opening. That's a good job. West Virginia, as we talked about, has an opening. That's a good job. I'm very curious to see what the hires are at West Virginia, Washington, Michigan, and also to some extent Louisville. And I think that will help us decide what people really think in the end of Ohio State elevating an assistant who had never been a head coach, who had been at Valparaiso, at Vanderbilt as an assistant, and then at Ohio State as an assistant. Again, Ryan Day was in the NFL at least for a while. So undeniably, Jake Diebler did a great job as the interim here. I am always a little skeptical of interim momentum leading to let's do it, when the resume and the experience is not if you just looked at the resume without the 6-2 record as the interim, there's no way you'd do it. So I'm not anti Jake Diebler. It's not the hire I would have made because I think Ohio State's basketball program is in a situation where they have a lot of money and they're only going to get more money in this new world. And what is the money for? The money's to pay the players eventually. But I think they could have tried to go after a sitting head coach at a big time program that maybe was getting a little restless or looking to leave. And so the one to watch, I think, is Scott Drew at Baylor. This is obviously, it's not my reporting. It's from a lot of reports. would he be in the mix somewhere? And to me, like if Scott Drew winds up as the head coach at Louisville, it's going to make me think, well, could Ohio State have gotten involved there? Because like sort of coincidentally, Jake Diebler played at Valparaiso. Scott Drew is part of that Valparaiso tree. Homer Drew, the longtime head basketball coach at Valparaiso. Scott Drew took over for him. Bryce Drew, who is Scott's brother, hit that miraculous shot. And he's a head coach in college basketball now, right? Jake Diebler worked at Vanderbilt because Bryce Drew was the head coach. Jake Diebler is like an honorary Drew. And so actually, like my ultimate scenario for Ohio State was get Scott Drew to leave Baylor and keep Jake Diebler as the number one assistant under Scott Drew. But Scott Drew has a national championship at Baylor. Save the Baylor basketball program. One of the best basketball coaches in the country. One of the best resumes in the country. Midwest guy, not that old. So maybe Jake Diebler will work out. And like, this is not like a shove it in my face when Jake Diebler leads Ohio State to the Final Four next year. Because I'm not saying it's how do I say this? I'm not saying it's wrong or a bad hire. It's not how I would choose to think as a program like Ohio State, which has as many resources as any athletic department in the country. They are at an athletic director transition from Gene Smith to Ross Bjork, which has complicated everything. And so I think maybe some of that is like, okay, this is a little weird. We have a guy who's done a great job. Maybe just keep him. But if you could have lured Scott Drew or like somebody like that, Dusty May at Florida Atlantic was the other name that was out there, kind of like a hot guy again, Indiana grad, Midwestern guy. Coincidentally, the team that Northwestern's playing in the first round of the NCAA men's tournament made the Final Four last year at Florida Atlantic. Like, you know, I'm not saying that Dusty May would have been 1,000% better than Jake Diebler. I'm a little wondering why Ohio State didn't shoot for the moon right now, unless maybe you try this, you get a 5-year contract, and then if for some reason this doesn't work out, then it's a shoot for the moon. Then it has to be a shoot for the moon situation for Ohio State, because this is something we talk about again, as much as there is this cohort of basketball programs in the country where basketball is clearly the sport. And that applies to schools like Villanova and Xavier and, you know, some of these programs that just compete at a different level. UConn, right? Even though UConn's at the FBS level, the football program is so far below the men's basketball program. But then, of course, we're talking about Kansas and Kentucky and Duke and North Carolina, the programs where basketball is king. We understand those programs are going to really focus on basketball. But I think programs with a ton of money, like Michigan, like Ohio State, like Notre Dame, like Oregon, our biggest programs in the North, they should strive to be both. They should strive to be good at everything. I think the standard for the very richest, when you're in the Big Ten and you're making all this money, the standard is be good at everything. The standard is do right by your athletes and then do right by your fans and like be good at everything because you have all the money in the world. So that's where I am on Ohio State right now. There would be a time where when you look at Ohio State's football success and then you look again where the women's basketball program is right now, and Kevin McGuff has it going, had it going early in his tenure, a little bit of a dip, got it back. And what the men's basketball program has been at times where Ohio State would be number one on this list. So this is a little bit of a snapshot right now because this program under Chris Holtmann truly bottomed out. So maybe it's about to bounce back up. It already bounced back up on the last 8 games, but the last 8 games can't carry the day when we're talking about the top 5, which is what we will do when we come back on Kings of the North. We'll get to the 5 very best combo programs in the North after this. Doug Lesmerises back on Kings of the North. If you did not catch our last show, it was an interview with Wisconsin head coach Luke Fickell, and I would direct you back to that. I thought it was interesting. Again, it's something a little different. I mean, we certainly want to have other people on the show. Bill Landis will be back soon. Just couldn't make it today, but I thought it's an interesting Luke conversation. And the thing we're going to always do when we have Northern coaches and players here is we're going to talk North-South. We're going to try to define that. We're going to try to get some opinions on that. Sometimes people aren't going to want to go there necessarily. Sometimes I hope people do go there on what's the difference between the North and the South when it comes to college football. And second show this week, we are planning our spring football mega preview part 2. We covered 13 teams that were getting ready to launch spring football in our first mega preview. Our other 13 teams we will cover this week. There are a bunch of schools that are starting spring football practice this week. Michigan, national champs among them, that had not started yet. So again, we like to touch base on everybody. Make sure you guys have a little bit of knowledge on all the teams in the North because we think you all have something in common. 5 is Oregon. Dana Altman made this happen. Dana Altman has been the head basketball coach at Oregon for 14 years. He's made 8 of the last 11 NCAA tournaments. In his time at Oregon, he's made 5 Sweet 16s. He made the Final Four in 2017. And Oregon, as the 4 seed, had to win the Pac-12 tournament to get this bid. They beat Arizona along the way, helped keep Arizona from being a 1 seed. Arizona's a 2 seed, but they're not in the North, so we don't care about them. Oregon's an 11 seed against South Carolina. But this is a little bit, right? You saw this when Oregon did this. There was a lot of like Dana Altman, that magician, right? This is a guy that I think really has the hearts and minds of Oregon basketball fans. So a 23-11 season that was going to keep them out probably. If you don't beat Arizona, and you don't win your way in, this would have been like a good season that just missed. But instead, it's like back to the tournament where Oregon in this era with Dana Altman is a regular contender. So the juice of right now, with the way they're playing right now to get in, and the recent history, again, 5 Sweet 16s in the Dana Altman era, that's a big deal when you're talking about, for instance, right? Why is Oregon 5 and Ohio State 6? Ohio State hasn't made the Sweet 16 in men's basketball in a decade. Dana Altman's made 5 in the last 14 years. So, like, that's a difference. So, like, who's in better shape right now from men's basketball standpoint? It's Oregon. For clearly, like, Dana Altman's your guy. Okay. Women's basketball is in a super weird spot for Oregon right now. Oregon women's basketball on January 14th was 11-7. Did not win the rest of the year. Finished the season on a 14-game losing streak. Went from 11-7 to 11-21. And this has been like a really good program. Kelly Graves, the head coach, is in his 10th year. Between 2017 and 2022, made 5 straight NCAA tournaments. They would have been a 1 seed in the COVID year in 2020. They were awesome in the COVID year. They would have been a 1 seed. 11-21 this year, 20-15 last year. Yeah, again, was competitive last year, didn't make the tournament. But this has been like, again, this was, until the last 2 years, this was like an excellent women's basketball program. They're on a 14-game losing streak. So I'm certainly not an expert on Oregon women's basketball. It's crazy. So if we had done this in January, Oregon might have been in the top 3. Because, right, what the recent history, men's basketball, women's basketball at Oregon, recent history, tournament, competitive, high level. So, maybe there'd be some people who be like, listen, man, 11-21 women's basketball season, how can you have them 5? Well, I'm taking the recent history of women's basketball into account. Men's basketball, you love your coach, you're getting it done, and then football's in a great spot. So Dan Lanning, obviously getting it done at Oregon, did not go to Alabama. National title contender this year, was a national title contender last year, lost to Washington twice. They've made New Year's Six bowls 3 of the last 5 years. Taking the COVID year out, last 4 full years, double-digit wins every year, 44-11 overall. This is, like, right now one of the 5 best programs in college football. So to me, like, again, this era right now, awesome football program, and recent history, consistent winner in both basketballs. So that's top 5 for me. And 14 straight losses at the end of the year is tough. I'm sure if you're an Oregon fan, like, you have a better handle on this than I do. So, like, wow. But I don't know if that means that Oregon people think the women's program is off a cliff, or if it was just like one of those things. But they got to get that turned around. So this is a little bit more of a divide here. I think there's a decent size gap maybe between what Oregon is doing right now and what our number 4 team, Iowa, is doing. And we'll start, of course, with Caitlin Clark. She's revolutionized women's basketball. She is the most popular college basketball player in the country right now. But also, it's not like Iowa women's basketball wasn't good before her. Lisa Bluter, 24 years as the head coach for Iowa women's basketball, 18 tournaments. Remarkable. Runner-up last year to LSU, great national title game. Like, again, just like awesome for women's basketball. Iowa, a 1 seed this year. Did not win the regular season Big Ten title, but did win the Big Ten tournament. So that was a great win for them. The last 5 NCAA tournaments, their seeds 2-5, 2-2-1. So this is recently, right? The last 5 years, as good, almost as good as anybody. Not a national title, not South Carolina, but like in the mix as much as anybody. So like an all-time head coach in Lisa Bluter and an all-time player in Caitlin Clark, and you guys don't need a lecture on how good Iowa women's basketball is. Iowa men's basketball is pretty good. Did not make the tournament this year. Did not make the NCAA tournament. Good run at the end of the year. 18-14 overall. Fran McCaffrey has made the tournament 7 times in 14 years there, including 7 of the last 10. Have not been good in the tournament. Got knocked out. The last 7 times, like, so the 7 times that Fran McCaffrey is the head coach at Iowa has made the tournament, they are 5-7, and they've only won multiple games once, I think. So it's good. It's competitive. Iowa has a pretty solid men's basketball history. So this is like a good, solid men's basketball program. It is not extraordinary. Maybe you're actually looking for another level a little bit. If you're the Iowa men, again, 18-14 for the men this year, 29-4 for the Iowa women. So like a good, solid basketball team. If we're talking about like, okay, the women are a 1 seed and the football program's been a winner, and the team that is falling short is the men's program. It's why they're 2 of 3 instead of 3 and 3. The men's program has been there and was fairly close this year. If they had won another game or 2 in the Big Ten tournament, maybe would have had a shot to get in. Did not quite happen. And then football, again, we're probably at the point where I need to stop talking about Iowa football and how good I think they're going to be this year. They've finished in the top 25 5 of the last 6 years under Kirk Ferentz, and they fixed their biggest problem. The last 4 full seasons, taking out the COVID year, they're 38-16 with 3 10-win seasons. In 25 years under Kirk Ferentz, they've only had 4 losing seasons, and 2 of them were his first 2 years. So the last 23 years under Kirk Ferentz, 21 good seasons, 2 losing seasons. Like, this has been a consistent winner. 10-4 last year. So when we're talking about Caitlin Clark revolutionizing the sport, the Iowa men's program making the men's tournament half the time under Fran McCaffrey, and the way Iowa football is a consistent winner, like, this is a served fan base, especially because they fired Brian Ferentz. Like, that served the fan base too. So like if you're an Iowa sports fan right now, you're in a really good spot. So are you like the women? Because you have one team, one of your 3 teams is a national championship contender. I wouldn't say that Iowa football or Iowa men's basketball is a national championship contender, but you have tournament expectations, and I believe that Iowa can be a playoff contender this year. So that's pretty good. That's why they're in the top 4. There was a moment when I thought Iowa might be even higher than this, like based on like right now, especially if I was starting to put this together a couple weeks ago. And it was like, man, if the Iowa men really make a run and they get the men in the tournament, coupled with the 10-win football season, coupled with women being a 1 seed, that might be number 2 on this list. They weren't going to be number 1. But as it is, I think with recent history taken into account, I think number 4 is the best spot for them. 3 is Notre Dame. Notre Dame, since going 20-16 in football, since going 4-8 in football in 2016. Did I say since they went 20-16 in football? Since the 2016 season, when they had a huge dip under Brian Kelly and they went 4-8, they have won at least 9 games every year since then. They have been in the top 20 in football the last 7 years. Marcus Freeman in his 2 years is 19-7. They were 10-3 a year ago. I say all this because I think maybe Notre Dame football maybe is underrated. Like, again, it's what you expect Notre Dame to be. Are they a national championship contender in the top tier? Absolutely not. Are they a locked in, no doubt about it, like 10-win football team every single year? And they make their own schedule, but yeah, they are. So it's weird to come on a show and remind people, hey, Notre Dame's good at football. But I do think sometimes the biggest conversation we wind up having around Notre Dame football is that they're overrated because we think of them, or maybe preseason polls rate them in a way that they are perceived to be a national title contender. And if you understand that right now, they are not at the Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia level. They're not. But they're in the tier below, and they're consistently in the mix, right? They've made the playoff in the 14 playoff. I actually want to, I want to give shout out Notre Dame football. Weird, but I need to say it. Men's basketball dipped this year. Micah Shrewsbury, that I think a lot of people thought was a really good hire from Penn State, former Purdue assistant, 13-20 in his first year as a head coach at Notre Dame. But Notre Dame is a basketball winner. Mike Bray had been the head coach there for 23 years, made 13 of 22 tournaments. Of course, the year they didn't have a COVID tournament. 13 of 22 tournaments, but he only made one in the last 6 years, which is why he's not the head coach there anymore. They had 4 of the last 6 years at Notre Dame men's basketball has been a losing season. So you could, maybe I'm doing it right now, you could say this is too high for them because it's been down for a bit here, right? This is an under 500 men's basketball team this year, and they've made the tournament once in the last 6 years. Okay. Might be too high, but they are a national power in women's basketball. And so with how a regular 10-win football program and a national power in women's basketball, I think probably even beyond Iowa women's basketball, because they've won recent national titles. So I like recent history, women's basketball. I'd take Notre Dame slightly ahead of Iowa. I'd take Notre Dame football slightly ahead of Iowa. And then I'd take Iowa men's basketball ahead of Notre Dame men's basketball right now. But it's like, if we're trying to parse 3 versus 4, that's why I have Notre Dame 3-3. Niele Ivey, the head coach there in her 4th year, took over for the legend, Muffet McGraw. Muffet McGraw in 33 years as the head coach at Notre Dame women's basketball, 9 Final Fours, 2 national titles. Niele Ivey made the Sweet 16 each of the last 2 years as a 2 seed this year. Like, they're still awesome. It's not easy to come in and take over for a legend. She was a great player there. She was the right hire. She's taken over. She's kept the standard. Absolutely. And Notre Dame it's going to be hard to beat South Carolina, but Notre Dame has a chance to win the national title this year, as does Iowa, as does Ohio State. So, like, they're the 3 best women's basketball programs in the North: Iowa, Ohio State, Notre Dame right now. So I think top 3 is worthy. I think top 3 is worthy when you think about, again, Bill Landis thinks Notre Dame football could go undefeated this season. So 2 programs in very, very, very good shape at Notre Dame. And then men's basketball, the Micah Shrewsbury hire was the right hire. And I think this was a reset year. And I do think Notre Dame basketball, men's basketball, is going to be back. This one is tough and crazy, and it is a reflection. We have to have the conversation. They absolutely deserve to be in the top 10, but Michigan at 2 might be too high when they just had their worst men's basketball season ever. 24 losses, the most men's basketball losses in the 107 years of Michigan men's basketball. And they're 2. Here's the thing. In like the last 10 years, I think you could argue that Michigan men's basketball is the best Northern basketball program. They've made 7 Sweet 16s in the last 13 years. That's a lot. John Beilein had it going there, made 2 national title games under John Beilein. That is not that far away. And then Juwan Howard came in and was making Sweet 16s and Elite 8s. They haven't made the tournament the last 2 years. Okay. Last year, they were at least solid. They were like a 20-win team. They were terrible this year. Worst men's basketball program in the Big Ten. Worst men's basketball team in the Big Ten, not program. But it cost Juwan Howard his job. So again, we have 2 programs in our top 6 in our overall rankings in Ohio State and Michigan that fired their men's basketball coach. But for Ohio State, it's the standard of winning with football and the women's team. The women's team is solid at Michigan, and they won the national title in football. So they have a chance to make a great hire at Michigan for men's basketball. But when you look at the history I did the NCAA tournaments. Okay. Is that what I did? Yeah, this is what I did. The most Sweet 16s in the last decade. Okay. In the North, the most Sweet 16s in the last decade. Michigan men have the most. So, like, I don't know, man. Like, that's what I'm leaning on here a little bit. So that's hard. Um, if you want to ding me and say you're a lunatic for having Michigan second with this atrocious season in men's basketball, they should be behind Notre Dame, should be behind Oregon. Ohio State men's basketball didn't make it, but at least they rebounded and had a good year, made the NIT, won 20 games. Michigan won 8. You could say that, but this is the best football season in Michigan history. So this is one of the great programs in college football history, and this was their best year. So that really matters. And again, I'm not taking points off because Jim Harbaugh left, because J.J. McCarthy left, because Junior Colson and so many of their defenders left. I'm not taking points off for that. So I'm talking about the absolute all-time peak of Michigan football with the all-time bottoming out of men's basketball. And then the women's basketball team is quite good. So if the women's basketball team wasn't as good, then we'd be not talking to them at number 2. But Kim Barnes-Arico has built a winner there in 12 years. She's made 7 NCAA tournaments. They made the tournament this year. They made the Sweet 16 in 2021 and 2022. They're a 9 seed at 20 and 13 this year. She's 261 and 132 overall. This is an absolute consistent women's basketball winning program. So Kim Barnes-Arico is sort of like in a world where Jim Harbaugh's gone and Juwan Howard got fired. Think about that. If we had done like best men's basketball, football head coach pairings a year ago, would Juwan Howard and Jim Harbaugh have been number 1 in the North before this basketball season? Michigan football coming off 2 straight playoffs, Juwan Howard having made a Sweet 16 and an Elite 8 in a short time there. Would Juwan Howard and Jim Harbaugh would they have been the number 1 coaching combo, football and men's basketball? One won it all and left, and one got fired. What a transitional time for Michigan sports. But at least you're number 2 in the Kings of the North combo rankings. But Kim Barnes-Arico is not going anywhere, so that's good for you. Okay. Has to be number 1 because this is the only program in the North, one of 10 in the country, that had a football team make the bowl game, that had the men's team make the NCAA basketball tournament, that had the women's team make the NCAA basketball tournament, and it is Iowa State. Iowa State is the best football, basketball combo in the North, okay? I want to get Jamie Pollard, who's been the AD there since 2005. I want to get him on the program and talk about this. I think he was on the basketball committee, so he was kind of busy this week. So we weren't, I didn't even try to get him. But like, we have to acknowledge how good this is. And this is not just now. This is not just now. This is how much of a consistent winner Iowa State major sports have been. And I think there are people watching this and listening to this being like, what? Iowa State? Yes, Iowa State. Football, Matt Campbell, 8 years, 6 bowl games. 6 of the last 7 years. So he had a losing record his first year. 6 of the last 7 years, Iowa State's had a winning record. Okay. The previous, 6 winning years in 7. Okay. To find 6 winning years in Iowa State football prior to that, you have to go back 28 years. So 6 winning years in the last 7. Before that, 6 winning years in the previous 28. That is the standard that Matt Campbell has established at Iowa State with the Cyclones. 53 and 48 overall, 6 bowl games. Like, I'm telling you, like, I don't know if people understand how good this is for Iowa State football. Okay. So that's one. That's football. That's a bowl game. That's one. Women's basketball. Bill Fennelly, 29 years, 21 NCAA tournaments, 6 Sweet 16s. They are 20-11 and a 7 seed this year, the Iowa State Cyclones. The last 5 NCAA women's tournaments, these are their seeds: 3-7, 3-5-7. They did lose in the first round last year as a 5 seed, which is obviously a little bit of disappointment. This is a consistent top 20 women's basketball team with a legend who's been there for 3 decades. Okay. So that's what we're talking about. Winning every year, like tournament 85% of the time. All right. So the football program is in the best run in its history at a program that has been a consistent loser in football. They are now a consistent winner. That's new. This women's program makes the tournament like every year they enter with tournament expectations. And almost every year they deliver. That's where the women's program is. The men's program is a 2 seed and could win the national title. Just beat Houston to win the Big 12 tournament. TJ Otzelberger is a former assistant at Iowa State, who then was a head coach at UNLV. They got him back a couple years ago. This is his 3rd year, 11 seed, 6 seed, 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. They got to keep this. Like, their biggest problem now is making sure they keep this guy. They made the Sweet 16 2 years ago. They've made the men's tournament 10 of the last 12 tournaments. Like Fred Hoiberg, right, was at Iowa State previously, helped this, continue that winning there. Think about that. So 10 of the last 12 men's tournaments, 21 of the last 29 women's tournaments, and they've made 6 bowls in the last 8 years in football. That's why they're number 1. Did you know that about Iowa State? I didn't know that before, right? This research. That's how good they are. They're the only Northern program to make a bowl game and both the women's and men's tournaments in basketball in this season. So that's why they're number 1. So to recap real quick, our top 10, Colorado was 10, Utah was 9, Nebraska was 8, Northwestern was 7, Ohio State was 6, Oregon was 5, Iowa was 4, Notre Dame was 3, Michigan was 2, Iowa State was 1. I don't think you can argue with Iowa State. I think there are other things you could argue with there. So now let's look holistically, because there's a couple other schools I want to shout out here. This is the last 10 years. It's starting with the 2014 basketball season. So it's Sweet 16s in basketball, men's and women's, and New Year's 6 bowls in football. It's the last 10 football seasons, and it's the last 9 NCAA tournaments, okay, because we didn't have one in the COVID year. How many total do you have? Number 1 with 14 total between New Year's 6 football appearances, Sweet 16 basketball appearances, men and women. Ohio State and Notre Dame have 14. Michigan has 13. Oregon has 12. Then there's a drop. 7 for Maryland, Wisconsin, and Michigan State. 6 for Washington and Penn State. 5 for Iowa State and Iowa. And 4 for Utah, Purdue, and Syracuse. So those are our top programs. So now, here's the thing, though, when you break it down. Ohio State, they're 14. It's 10 football, and it's 4 Sweet 16s for women's basketball and none for the men. Who are the programs that have reached the threshold we established here with Sweet 16s and New Year's 6 bowls in all their sports? There's only 5 in the North. Notre Dame, Michigan, Oregon, Iowa State, and Utah. They are the ones that in every program you could say you have this great level of achievement where you got to the second weekend of basketball, Sweet 16, just to win 2 games and then have another whole week of excitement and prep. And now, we get to the Final Four. I think the Sweet 16, because of the difference between 1 weekend of NCAA tournament excitement and 2 weekends, is vast. It's great making the tournament. It is otherworldly making the Sweet 16. That's why that's a great threshold. And then a New Year's 6 bowl, again, I think sometimes in the 14 playoff era, we took the other 4 New Year's 6 bowls for granted. It's a big deal. Like these prestigious, historic bowls right? Where you're playing a great opponent. I know sometimes there were a lot of opt-outs and stuff like that. I still think it mattered, and it's going to matter even more. Our threshold going forward will be making the 12-team playoff, which will soon be a 14-team playoff in 2026, and the Sweet 16. But for now, I really want to acknowledge Notre Dame, Michigan, Oregon, Iowa State, and Utah as being able in the last decade to have all three of these programs we're talking about achieve that high level of success. So that is our best combos. We will come back and zero all the way in on football. There's a couple things we did talk about. Trev Alberts moving on from Nebraska to Texas A&M. I mean, there's certainly a discussion around political leadership in states and how that affects major state universities, more so with university presidents and like actual learning, which is actually more important than college sports, but it can trickle down to the athletic department. And when you talk about any leadership structure, if you do have political involvement with that, it can affect people's decisions. And so there may be some of that, right? Nebraska just lost its university president, Ted Carter, who left to come to Ohio State, and now they lose the athletic director. I'm not saying I'm an expert on Nebraska politics, but that's something that people are talking about. So is that a super fun thing that we're going to dive into a ton on this show, on this football show? No. Let's talk about the political effects of government leadership on college. But Trev Alberts is kind of a crazy move. We have not yet talked about Tony Alford, the Ohio State running backs coach, leaving for Michigan, which is also kind of a crazy move. When we talk about Michigan in our spring football mega preview part 2 later in the week, we'll talk about that. So we have, there's stuff going on. We have stuff going on. And we appreciate you guys being here. There's still like some coaching movement, late coaching movement happening. We have a lot of our schools that have started, about 10 or 11 of our schools have started. Others are starting this week. Most will have started by the end of this week. We'll have started spring football practice. So that's what we'll do on Thursday. But also we know like NCAA tournaments here and go North, right? I don't know. Go North. So this is one of those where like the big time football schools on the North, like I'm not. The last couple of years, there was a time when I was going through these Sweet 16s and stuff. There was a time when, right, Michigan and Oregon and Syracuse and Ohio State and Notre Dame and like Wisconsin, right, where they were really making Sweet 16s and mattering a lot. Like these schools that play big time football in the North, really mattering in men's basketball. Not as much the last couple of years. So this would be a good time for a couple of these schools to rise up. But also, I think there's a real shot. It's going to be really hard to beat South Carolina in the women's tournament. But I think Iowa and Ohio State and Notre Dame all have a shot at it. So I think it'll be fun to watch the Northern women's basketball teams in their tournament as well. All right. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making me look as good as possible. There's only limited stuff you can work with here. It's a lot about the clay, not the sculptor. And for making us, sound good and making all these graphics. We always appreciate so much what Mike does for this show in creating Kings of the North. Again, Bill Landis will be back soon. For now, really appreciate you guys making us part of your college sports week. And I am Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.